So tonight, we welcome back our amazing Gresham Professor of IT, Professor Victoria Baines. But it's both a happy and a sad evening because we're going to get a wonderful lecture, as always, but it's her last lecture as Gresham Professor of IT. So it's a sad evening too. But let's make the absolute most of the privilege of hearing Victoria speak. Her topic this evening is the moral case for stealing data. So thank you, Victoria.
Thank you, Sarah. Somehow I have managed to deliver 3 years of Gresham lectures on information technology without really discussing Edward Snowden in any great detail. So, for those of you who have been waiting for me to do so, thank you for your patience. The wait is over, or at least it will be very shortly, because first I need to tell you about 1194. Believe it or not, 1194 was a very big year in the history of data theft. History tells us that we can sometimes have unexpected, unauthorized access to data, and this appears to have been the case for Richard the Lionheart. In the last 800 years, there has been much speculation about the nature of his relationship with King Philip II of France. And some people have even held that they were lovers, based on the following text in the chronicle of the reign of Richard's father, Henry II. Richard, Duke of Aquitaine, the son of the King of England, remained with Philip, the King of France, who so honoured him for so long that they ate every day at the same table and from the same dish, and at night their beds did not separate them. And the King of France loved him as his own soul, and they loved each other so much that the King of England was absolutely astonished at the passionate love between them and marvelled at it. However, this closeness did not stop them going to war. In July 1194, their forces met at Fréteval in the Loire Valley. By now, King Richard ambushed Philip, who promptly fled, abandoning his baggage train, which, according to Roger of Howden, contained vast treasure, with the furniture of the King's chapel and the papers of all the subjects of the King of England who had deserted him and become adherents of the King of France and Earl John. So seizure of information doesn't appear to have been the primary aim, but it gave Richard a strategic advantage because the papers on the deserters may have contained sensitive information, what we would now perhaps categorize as personal data. And one can see how information on their geographical locations might be used to pursue them or on their financial resources to extort them. Sensitive data, however it comes to be subject to unauthorized access, can endanger. Spurned lover steals secret papers is a great headline, and we see elements of this story in dramatic representations, including James Goldman's The Lion in Winter and its mesmerizing movie adaptation from the late 1960s. Some historians see the Battle of Fréteval as a defining moment in European data history. And one belief is that it caused Philip to establish standing archives, the Trésor des Chartes. But this has been challenged by researchers at the French National Archive, who have cautioned that the first mention of a permanent depository for documents doesn't appear until 1231. In around 1205, Philip did begin compiling a cartulary, a register in which important documents were transcribed. So, one might at least be able to infer that data loss at Fréteval may have encouraged the king to alter his practices by keeping what in modern parlance would be termed a backup copy. And this episode highlights how, when data is kept in a physical artifact, it can literally be stolen. Down the centuries, various means have been used to protect repositories of information and knowledge, such as the chained libraries of the medieval period and curses written in the books themselves. When it comes to digital technology, it's very rarely the case that the only copy of data is stolen. Most often, it is copied, just as identity theft more often entails the cloning and reuse of identity credentials. The victim still has the data. The theft consists in the fact that someone else also has it. The physical artifact, if there is one at all, is of negligible value compared to the richly illuminated volumes of earlier eras. Value lies purely in the data stored or transmitted. By contrast, the laborious work of the medieval scribe hindered attempts at swift, clandestine copying, although there is ample evidence that copyists interfered with texts by adding their own insertions, comments, and translations. It's been suggested, indeed, most compellingly by Kathleen Kennedy, that medieval copyists are the ideological ancestors of modern hackers. Why? Because in a pre-copyright era, they treated text-based knowledge as an information commons to be openly distributed and freely recycled. Now, this analogy does have its constraints, not least the fact that reading and writing were very much elite activities until the 20th century in most societies. But it does perhaps help us to consider our contemporary preoccupations of knowledge and information transfer and of data protection from diverse historical perspectives. One obvious motivation for taking data that doesn't belong to us is, of course, financial. And this is the realm of the cyber criminal. And at several points in my lectures, we've seen how our personal data is monetized. Our stolen login credentials can be used to gain unauthorized access to accounts or sold on to others. The ransomware attacks that are so prevalent in the last 10 years rely on extorting victims, demanding that they pay to regain access to locked files or to prevent publication of copied data. And likewise, unauthorized access to proprietary data on cutting-edge research and innovation can give competitors an advantage, be they companies or governments. And what we're really talking about here is espionage, which may conjure up images of 20th century spy cameras, such as this Minox subminiature. And we might describe these as dual-purpose technology, because as well as photographing human activity under covert surveillance, they were a means to copy data, to capture a document where its physical removal would draw unwanted attention. So whether trade secrets or state secrets, this particular flavor of data thief ultimately acts in another's interest. They may be freelancers selling to the highest bidder or direct employees of the benefiting organization or state. But nowadays, data is more portable than it has ever been. Now, the most challenging part of stealing data is obtaining access to it. In the cybercriminal world, this is the aim of phishing attacks that dupe victims into handing over their access credentials. But what if the access has actually been authorized? In cybersecurity, we tend to call this insider threat, and we profile insiders variously as financially motivated or personally aggrieved. And in the intelligence world, this category may also include operatives who are compromised, for instance, by being taken prisoner, or who are otherwise vulnerable to influence. In all types of organizations, those who are ideologically motivated to copy and leak data are, of course, often called whistleblowers. And the metaphorical use of this term is actually comparatively recent. The Oxford English Dictionary cites its earliest evidence for whistleblower from 1936 in the New York Daily News, and for whistleblowing, 1971 in the New Scientist. We associate this imagery with perhaps stopping play in sport, sounding an alarm, or compelling action in a law enforcement context. And insofar as it often denotes the revelation of information that has previously been kept secret, it bears some similarity with the practice of denunciation that we explored in my previous lecture, How Surveillance Works. You might remember the French revolutionaries who used evidence from intercepted letters to denounce aristocrats and other traitors. They certainly viewed themselves as exposing wrongdoing. Now, 1971 was a very big year for whistleblowing. It was the year that lawyer and activist Ralph Nader hosted the Conference on Professional Responsibility in Washington, D.C., starting the movement towards legal protection of corporate whistleblowers in the US. And it was also the year that former Rand Corporation analyst Daniel Ellsberg leaked a report he co-authored on the Vietnam War for the US military. What came to be known as the Pentagon Papers revealed a number of details about US involvement in the conflict that had not been made known to the public or the media. Among them, that the geographical scope of US operations was wider than publicly reported, and that the Johnson administration knew from early on in the conflict that their resources were insufficient to win. Now, for me, two key points stand out in this case. The first was the necessity for Ellsberg to steal, that is, photocopy, data in order to prove that what he was alleging was true. Because without evidence, these allegations could easily be denied. But removing data without due authorization has consequences, and particularly when the injured party is the government. For classified data, such as intelligence reporting, the thief is likely to face criminal charges, including theft of government property and violations under espionage legislation. At worst, they can be judged a traitor. So given the risk and impact on government whistleblowers, I think it's fair to say that none of them do it lightly. Secondly, whistleblowers' revelations are very often mediated rather than being released as raw data to the public en masse. Motivations for this include making huge volumes of technical material more accessible to a non-specialist readership, legal risk to the publisher, protection of sources, and, dare I say it, retention of reader engagement over time through serialization. Media outlets are, after all, focused at least in part on their circulation. All 47 volumes of the Pentagon Papers were fully declassified only in 2011, 40 years after highlights were published by the media. And that's not to say that I think media outlets behave dishonestly in selecting material for our consumption, simply that we're often unable to make our own unguided assessment of the alleged wrongdoing. Also unpublished until 2023 was a legal memo which revealed that New York Times reporter Neil Sheehan deceived Daniel Ellsberg. He secretly made copies of the 7,000-page report after promising not to. The unauthorized removal and distribution of the Pentagon Papers set in motion a chain of events that resulted in public debates concerning freedom of the press and the inviolability of the US presidency. President Nixon's administration served an injunction on the New York Times to stop it publishing further excerpts. And at that point, something extraordinary happened. Because a second copy of the Pentagon Papers had found its way to Senator Mike Gravel. And on the 29th of June, he convened a subcommittee meeting of the Senate. He read aloud from the papers until 1 o'clock in the morning and thereby entered thousands of pages of the report into the congressional record. He was personally protected by the speech or debate clause of the US Constitution, and that gives Congress members immunity from arrest or investigation for statements made on the floors of the House or Senate. The Supreme Court subsequently ruled later the same day that the New York Times and the Washington Post could continue to publish. The filmed footage of this event is worth a watch, and the transcript of Gravel's at times quite emotional speech is really worth reading in full. Here is just a small clip.
I could do it tomorrow, I could do it next week, I could do it the week after. And I could maybe just hang on to the documents and never do anything about it and just sit by and let time go on. But the thing that I'm overpowered with, totally overpowered with, is the fact that this very moment we're killing people in Vietnam with our tax dollars. When I came into possession of these papers, I looked around, and nobody in government had done anything. The only thing that was being done in government was an effort to stifle and hide this stuff. And it just dawned on me that somebody, if we're going to have any faith at all in our institutions, somebody from government's got to have the same resolve, the same feelings for stopping the killing as Ellsberg did, as the Post did, as the New York Times did, as the St. Louis Post-Dispatch, as all these journals. I only myself, because the people who released this were bureaucrats. You know, bureaucrats, the people that we disparage so often. They weren't elected officials, they were bureaucrats. And they have much less risk than I have. The risk that I have is being expelled from the Senate.
For copying and for leaking the papers, Daniel Ellsberg was charged with offences under the 1917 Espionage Act. But charges were dropped in light of evidence that two of the Watergate conspirators had broken into the offices of Ellsberg's psychiatrists to obtain files from this very filing cabinet, and that the White House had ordered Ellsberg's communications to be illegally wiretapped. So the ruling was not that Ellsberg was innocent of the charges, but that there was a mistrial due to procedural irregularities. Recordings of the president's telephone conversations on the day of first publication, the 13th of June, revealed that criminal prosecution was under discussion very early on. At 3 p.m., he had a phone call with Henry Kissinger, who was then serving as his national security advisor.
Hello.
Mr. President, I have Dr. Kissinger calling you.
Okay.
Thank you. President.
Hello.
Mr. President.
Hi, Henry. How are things in California?
Well, I just got here, and I'm going to leave very early in the morning, so I'll be back in the early afternoon.
Oh, I see. Well, that's, the Hague was very disturbed by that New York Times thing. I thought that
Well, Mr. President, I think.
unconscionable damn thing to them to do.
Unconscionable.
Of course, it's unconscionable on the part of the people that leaked it. Fortunately, it didn't come out in our administration. According to Hague, it all relates to the two previous administrations. Is that correct?
That is right. And
Well, you know, it may not have the effect it intended. The thing, though, that Henry, that to me is just unconscionable. This is treasonable action on the part of the bastards that put it out.
exactly, Mr. President.
Doesn't it involve secure information, a lot of other things? What kind of people would do such things?
It has the highest classification, Mr. President.
Yeah.
It's treasonable. There's no question. It's actionable. I'm absolutely certain that this violates all sorts of security law.
And the Times will justify it on the basis that it serves the national interest. Is that right?
Or
My God, you know, can you imagine the New York Times doing a thing like this 10 years ago? Even 10 years ago.
Mr. President, and then when McCarthy accused them of treason, They were screaming bloody murder. This is treason.
That's right. Well, whatever they may think of the policy, it is treasonable to take this stuff out, and
Oh, it's one thing
it
to...
serves the enemy.
So it's treason, it's actionable, and the Times will justify it as serving the national interest. In Nixon's words, what kind of people would do such things? What kind of people, indeed? 4 hours later, at 7 in the evening, the president has the following conversation with his assistant for domestic affairs, John Ehrlichman.
Hello.
It's Mr. Ehrlichman calling you.
Yeah.
You are?
Hello. Yeah. Mr. President, the Attorney General's called a couple times about these New York Times stories, and he's advised by his people that unless he puts the Times on notice, he's probably going to waive any right of prosecution against the newspaper. And he is calling now to see if you would approve his putting them on notice before their first edition for tomorrow comes out. I realize there are negatives to this in terms of the vote on the Hill.
You mean to prosecute the Times?
Right.
Hell, I wouldn't prosecute the Times. My view is to prosecute the goddamn pricks that gave it to them.
Yeah, if you can find out who that is.
Yeah, I know.
I'm not going to repeat that bit. The criminal offence here is that of someone who, for the purpose of obtaining information respecting the national defence, with intent or reason to believe that the information to be obtained is to be used to the injury of the United States, copies, takes, makes, or obtains, or attempts, or induces, or aids another to copy, take, make, or obtain any sketch, photograph, photographic negative, blueprint, plan, map, model, instrument, appliance, document, writing, or note of anything connected with the national defence. Neither ethics nor perceived public interest are mitigating circumstances. Chelsea Manning was found guilty of sharing thousands of classified files about US military operations in Iraq and Afghanistan with Julian Assange's WikiLeaks, and she was sentenced to 35 years in prison. This sentence was commuted by Barack Obama after she had served 7 years. The material she disclosed included a video that showed a US military helicopter killing civilians in Iraq. And regardless of his and many others' belief that he did the right thing, Edward Snowden is potentially looking at a 30-year prison sentence if he returns to the US. While working as a contractor to the US National Security Agency, he copied and removed many thousands of documents. And in 2013, he leaked these to the media, whereupon The Guardian and The Washington Post began publishing selected highlights. And among these was a PowerPoint slide deck explaining the US government's PRISM program of mass surveillance of our electronic communications. While it may make legal sense to governments to designate as traitors those who leak classified data, the rhetoric used by some spokespeople borders on the retaliatory. In a 2016 interview before his appointments by President Trump as director of the CIA and then Secretary of State, Congressman Mike Pompeo said in a TV interview, and speaking directly to the camera, directly to us, that the traitor Edward Snowden should be brought back from Russia and given due process. And I think that the proper outcome would be that he would be given a death sentence for having put friends of mine, friends of yours in the military today at enormous risk because of the information he stole and then released to foreign powers. Anticipation of the proper judicial outcome here, of course, has the contrary effect of subverting due legal process. Now, Snowden has maintained that he disclosed material only to journalists. The accusation that he released it to foreign powers, however, highlights an uncomfortable truth: that classified data made public can be exploited by those who want to do a country harm, including other states. And reference to Snowden's exile in Russia is also, of course, pointed. Although a statement published by WikiLeaks claimed that he had sought asylum in 20 other countries before Russia, the association with the Cold War enemy has always been problematic, and it's become even more so in light of geopolitical developments in recent years and reports that Snowden has been working for a Russian IT company. Protection for whistleblowers goes back at least as far as July the 30th, 1778, when the US, but then Continental, as it was known, Congress, intervened in the case of naval officers who had been subject to legal retaliation for speaking out about torture of British prisoners by the commander of the Continental Navy, Isaac Hopkins. Two of the officers, Richard Marvin and Samuel Shaw, appealed to Congress, who, as well as covering their expenses in the lawsuit brought by Hopkins, resolved that it is the duty of all persons in the service of the United States, as well as all other the inhabitants thereof, to give the earliest information to Congress or other proper authority of any misconduct, frauds, or misdemeanors committed by any officers or persons in the service of these states, which may come to their knowledge. There's an obvious tension, then, between competing conceptions of moral duty for a government employee. For one set of government actors, doing the right thing consists of speaking out. For another, it is protecting information at all costs. Edward Snowden is viewed as a hero by many, an insider who chose to speak truth to power, regardless of the impact on his personal safety and circumstances. Over a decade on, though, questions remain. We still don't know for certain exactly how many files Snowden exfiltrated. Estimates range from initial assessments in the tens of thousands to the Defense Intelligence Agency's later conclusion of around 1.7 million. According to any of these, it's clear that the documents made public between 2013 and 2018 constitute a tiny proportion of the material copied. Why so few? Mike Pompeo's allegation that Snowden's revelations endangered people also presents an ethical quandary. President Obama alluded to this in public in remarks a few months after publication, saying that the sensational way in which these disclosures have come out has often shed more heat than light, while revealing methods to our adversaries that could impact our operations in ways that we may not fully understand for years to come. Now, I was still working in law enforcement when this story broke, and there was genuine concern, not to say fear, that serving military and intelligence personnel would be harmed as a result of these disclosures. But the trouble is that we've not been able to test that hypothesis, because any data about this impact is itself highly classified. In 2016, the US House of Representatives conducted a review of the leaks reported. And they came back with the findings that to gather the files Snowden took with him when he left the country, he infringed on the privacy of thousands of government employees and contractors. Also, that he obtained his colleagues' security credentials through misleading means, that he abused his access as a systems administrator to search his co-workers' personal drives, and that he removed the personally identifiable information of thousands of employees and contractors. So this, and reports in the media based on an NSA memo, that agency employees were disciplined for giving their login credentials to Snowden, would appear to indicate that he gained unauthorized access to data. I should say, though, that Snowden has denied this. The suggestion that he used underhand tactics shouldn't undermine the veracity of his disclosures per se, but it does perhaps give ammunition to those, including the US government, who challenge his identification as a whistleblower. In the previous lecture, we explored the impacts of surveillance, how the feeling of being under observation can alter one's behaviour. And this is sometimes known as chilling effects. And it has been suggested that Edward Snowden's revelations about mass electronic surveillance by the US and UK governments led to mass chilling effects online. Jonathan Penny at the University of Toronto analysed views of Wikipedia articles on sensitive topics such as terrorism, and what he found was a statistically significant immediate decline in web traffic to these articles after June 2013, when the first Snowden leaks were published. It raises the uncomfortable and rather paradoxical possibility that bringing this material out into the open actually constrained people's access to information to some degree. Okay, so far, the cases we have discussed have focused on public exposure of government wrongdoing. In the corporate world, it's now seen as a mark of an ethically responsible company to have a process for raising concerns and protecting those who do. But just having a whistleblowing policy does not in itself guarantee that there won't be retaliation for speaking out. In 2016, 2 anonymous letters were sent to Barclays Bank, and they raised concerns about the chief executive's decision to hire a former colleague. Rather than following the established whistleblowing procedures, the chief executive personally directed the company's chief security officer to investigate the whistleblower. And this executive reportedly then asked law enforcement in the United States to try to identify the person who sent the letters, including attempting to obtain video footage of the person buying the postage stamps. When this came to the notice of financial regulators, Barclays was fined $15 million in the US, and the chief executive was personally fined $1.5 million and £642,430, 10% of his pay, by UK regulators. Barclays also cut his bonus by £500,000. The UK Financial Conduct Authority put the company under special reporting requirements for its whistleblowing systems and controls. Now, this sounds like a good outcome, doesn't it? It's testament to the courage of that original anonymous letter writer and the process and perhaps the additional people who brought the resulting misconduct to the attention of the regulators. But here, too, it may be possible for us to discern chilling effects, because fewer investigations were opened by Barclays' whistleblowing team in the years following the fines. From a baseline of 364 in 2018, the company's annual reports show that the number had dropped to just 67 in 2023 and 69 in 2024. So, as for governments, so also for corporates. Trust can be eroded even when wrongdoing is punished. Unauthorized access to data is more commonly known as hacking. And over the last few decades, hacktivism has deployed some tactics similar to those of whistleblowers, often committing cybercrimes for ideological ends. As well as claiming responsibility for attacks that have disabled and defaced target websites, affiliates of the group Anonymous have declared war on ISIS, targeted the Church of Scientology, and taken down thousands of sites on the dark web involved in the distribution of child abuse material. Their moral position is complex. It encompasses more than the single issue of anti-government sentiment and perhaps reflects its status as a decentralized collective. In 2012, it published the names, home addresses, email addresses, and phone numbers of members of the Westboro Baptist Church after the church announced its intention to stage a picket at Sandy Hook Elementary School to promote its belief that a mass shooting at the school had been God's vengeance for same-sex marriage equality. In this last case, the motivation for Anonymous's activity appears commonsensical and certainly compassionate to LGBT plus people. One might argue that it justifies the crimes committed, but again, there is no protection for this in the law. There is greater acceptance of ethical hacking, a practice which entails identifying vulnerabilities in software, systems, or networks, and reporting them to the organization at risk so that they can take remedial action. It's also known as coordinated or responsible vulnerability disclosure. And it spawned a new income stream and specialization in cybersecurity. Big tech companies offer bug bounties, rewards for reports of vulnerabilities. There are clear guidelines for these. For instance, to be eligible for a payout from Microsoft, submissions need to include proof, be the first report of an issue, avoid harm to customer data, privacy, and service availability, and give the company time to correct the issue before making it public. Precisely because such schemes can be lucrative, Microsoft offers payments of up to $250,000 for a single vulnerability. Things do not always go to plan because it can be challenging to invite hackers to hack and then demand that they play by your rules. Researchers who find a vulnerability but are not the first to report it, or researchers who are ignored by companies can take revenge when they fail to win a bounty. And perhaps inevitably, this process has also been misused. In 2022, a platform for coordinating bug bounty reports and payouts found that one of its employees had stolen reports to sell on as their own. Coordinated vulnerability disclosure is also only effective if the organization does something with the information they receive. Failure to remediate puts systems and end users at unnecessarily prolonged risk. And as a result, companies that specialize in identifying these vulnerabilities often adopt policies and procedures, such as specifying a time limit for receiving organizations to respond before they disclose them to the wider public. We also have deliberate, unauthorized release of personal data, and that is popularly known as doxing. It's a common tactic of those who wish to humiliate or harass a target, from abortion doctors to biomedical students to, somewhat bizarrely, celebrities who make a stand against animal cruelty. It's the digital manifestation of silencing someone with the statement, "We know where you live," but with the added complication that the very act of publishing that data endangers the physical safety of the target. Because once the data is out there, it's no longer in the publisher's control. Anyone can choose to act upon it. Both the doxers and those who use the leaked information to harass may claim a moral impetus, may claim a moral impetus. But as recent cases have shown, moral justifications can be highly idiosyncratic and certainly not universally shared. Just as we may feel that Snowden's alleged misuse of colleagues' login credentials crosses the line, so too do we see other instances of methods that could be viewed as harmful and unethical. You might remember, if you attended my lecture on sex and the internet last year, this particular case. In 2015, hackers calling themselves the Impact Team gained access to the entire customer database for Ashley Madison, a dating platform that specialised in adultery. And the group demanded the immediate closure of the platform and a sister service called Established Men. Now, the impact team has been described as morally motivated. I think that's correct to an extent, but not quite in the way one might expect. Because rather than simply judging the users for their infidelity, a statement by the group pointed the finger at the company for profiting off the pain of others and not honouring their promise to operate a private and secure service, specifically to completely delete personal data when users paid for the privilege. As a result of the hack, the personal data of 37.6 million users was exposed to public scrutiny, and this led to real-world harm for many, even people who were no longer actively using the platform. Careers, marriages, lives ended. The users were the ones who paid the price, which appears somewhat inconsistent with the hackers' professed dismay at their being defrauded. And there were parties ready to exploit that data. Moral crusaders, including a regional US newspaper which printed the names of all local subscribers. Ultimately, we can never know for certain whether the hackers really did steal the data out of moral outrage or denounce perceived wrongdoing. But what this and other exposures highlight is that there is often a tension between morality and compassion, public interest and the best interests of individuals. Now, recent events have demonstrated very clearly that in the digital age, governments find it increasingly hard to keep control of information, even when it is shared on channels perceived to be secure. In March of this year, journalist Jeffrey Goldberg did not hack his way into a discussion on the messaging app Signal between leading US government figures about plans to attack the Houthi group in Yemen. He was mistakenly added to the group by National Security Advisor Mike Waltz. Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth discussed the pros and cons of airstrikes, and Hegseth reassures the group that he will do all we can to enforce 100% operational security. In previous lectures, particularly Cybersecurity for Humans, way back in 2023, we discovered how protecting information, networks, and systems relies not only on technology, but also on following due process and ensuring that we address human vulnerabilities. Using an end-to-end encrypted app like Signal means that messages can be read only by those who are members of the group. But all the technical security measures in the world cannot eliminate the risk of failures in process and human error. In this case, adding someone to the group who really shouldn't be there. Now, the Trump administration maintains that no classified information was shared in the group. But the discussion is certainly sensitive and its publication arguably embarrassing. Vance and Hegseth make highly informal references to bailing out Europe again and pathetic European freeloading. Hegseth distributes the precise timetable for airstrikes, and I quote in capital letters, "This is when the first bombs will definitely drop." And we see some lovely use of macho emojis when targets are hit. So this was clearly not intended for a wider audience, let alone a public one. And in this context, Hegseth's reiteration that we are currently clean on operational security, unfortunately and somewhat ironically, did not apply to the channel on which it was uttered. Messages in the group were set to disappear after a specified period of time. And in the material published by Goldberg, this was changed by Mike Waltz from 1 week to 4 weeks. As emerged also here in the UK, in the inquiry into the government's response to COVID-19, use of unofficial messaging channels can frustrate oversight and accountability efforts, especially where messages are liable to deletion. Also of note, it has since been reported that Waltz used a third-party app to create an archive of these chats on Signal, and of course that this has itself been hacked. Insofar as they appear to evidence poor operational security and less than statesmanlike behaviour, there's a strong case for arguing that Goldberg's revelations were clearly in the public interest. For its part, the Trump administration initially accused the journalist of lying and then branded him, quote, a total sleazebag when he published the group chats to which he was party. The connotation of this insult suggests that he behaved unethically, that the right thing to do was to keep the incident and the content of the discussion to himself. But Goldberg is a journalist. He clearly has a different moral imperative to that of the US government. And precisely because the administration denied that the material included classified information, one could, I think, argue that this protects him from prosecution under the Espionage Act. The tendency to human error in the current US administration and the volume of data copied by Edward Snowden prompt a further question concerning the sheer scale of classified information generated and held by governments and utility of the same. Might we argue that there is a moral case for stealing data purely to shed light on the extent of the machinery of secrecy? Systematic analysis of declassified information by the History Lab at Columbia University indicates that the US government has a tendency to misclassify information. Its principal investigator, Matthew Connolly, has observed that 1.3 million Americans have security clearance to view top secret information. That's more than the population of Birmingham, UK, and about the same as Devon and Cornwall put together. Among the insights from the Snowden leaks was an item line in an NSA spreadsheet for almost $50 million a year on research into coping with information overload. The urge to hoard and secure all the relevant data available predates the digital age, as this 1940s photo of the FBI's vast identification haul illustrates. But we now find ourselves in a tech-facilitated paradox. IT at once enables governments to collect, but also lose more sensitive information than ever before. In the last 3 years, I have given 18 Gresham lectures, including this one. From the outset, we've considered how ownership and regulation of technology is complicated by different and sometimes diverging perceptions of what is acceptable behavior, how our emotional investment in online interactions and experiences blurs the line between digital and physical and allows others to exploit our hopes, fears, and principles. We've seen how our use of IT confronts us with tough ethical choices. We asked you, the people, what they thought, and you, the people, told us that you find them tough too. We've explored what happens when we mystify and catastrophize technology. We identified ways to make cybersecurity more inclusive and accessible, and we put them into practice in our Cyber Shorts series of safety videos.
Keep IT clean, keep IT safe, keep IT secure. Because when you keep IT safe, you keep everyone safe. Carry on.
Doing my very, very best Celia Johnson impression there. We've challenged preconceptions about who gets to use and misuse digital technology, examined our increasing reliance on IT for our critical infrastructure, our physiology, and our intimate relationships. We've taken stock of its impact on our privacy, and, of course, wondered where all of this is headed. This year, we've sought out lessons from history, and we've discovered ancestors who, like us, coveted and even fetishized technology and exploited others in the name of progress. We've seen how people find a way to communicate even in the face of significant obstacles. We've found that our love-hate relationship with artificial intelligence is nothing new. We've questioned the use of data to describe, prescribe, and proscribe us. And we've acknowledged our deep-seated urges to watch and control each other with technology. The morals and ethics of all of us, whether we are private citizens, corporations, or governments, have been close to the surface throughout, even when I didn't expect they would be. Technology does not develop in a vacuum. It always has been and always will be shaped by society and shaping it in return. As soon as it is put in the hands of any person or group of people, it reflects their morals and ethics just as much as it may challenge them. So, what have I learned from my Gresham lectures, and what do I hope you'll take away from them? That information technology is never, ever neutral. It is never just zeros and ones. Thank you very much indeed.